Wow. And while the Christians I know go to church every Sunday, what most of them actually know about the history of their own religion is dismayingly little. So here's the thing that's so easy to forget. We talk about ignorance of Islam, but non-Muslims are often, and in fact usually, just as ignorant about their own faiths. And often they distort their own faiths as badly as they distort Islam. Sometimes I'm even tempted to think that most evangelical Christians only ever read one book of the Bible, and that's the last one, Revelation, with its apocalyptic nightmares. Just as you could imagine that most Islamist extremists seem to know only one surah of the Quran, repentance, with the sword verses, so-called. An Orientalist misnomer, of course, right there, since the word sword never appears. And they have no idea of the historical circumstances of this surah, of its context, its frame of reference. Whoops. And so we come back to the highlighter version. Let's look, for instance, at this verse. When God delivers the city into your hands, you shall smite every male with the edge of your sword. You shall save alive nothing that breathes, but shall surely destroy them all. I haven't got it wrong. If this doesn't sound too familiar, that's because it is in fact one of the many peace-loving passages from the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 20, which continues to drive home the point. You shall save alive nothing that breathes, but you shall surely destroy them, namely the Hittites and the Amorites, the Canaanites and the Perizzites, the Hivites and the Jebusites. That's a lot of people. And this isn't the only kill them all order in the Bible. There's plenty more in Judges and Samuel, just for a start. Look up the word destroy in a biblical concordance and you'll find one of the longest lists it offers. The entry for peace is barely a quarter as long. On the other hand, we have these passages, all of which sound very familiar to Christians, even if they can't quite place them. Do not let hatred lead you away from justice. If anyone kills a person, it is as if they have killed all humanity. If they save a life, it is as if they have saved the lives of all humanity. An eye for an eye was formerly prescribed, but if anyone forgives out of mercy and charity, this will serve as atonement for their own bad deeds. Of course, none of these are from the Gospels, though they certainly sound to Christians as though they should be, but from the Quran. So that infamous section in the 9th Surah about killing the unbelievers, it does indeed say that, but in a very specific context, the anticipated conquest of Mecca, where fighting was usually forbidden. Just 8 years after the Hijrah, the Muslims of Medina were ready to take Mecca, and Muhammad's followers had asked him for guidance as to what to do if they came under attack near the Kaaba. Could they fight back, and in that case even kill someone on holy ground? The response in the form of a revelation was that yes, this was permitted, but the permission to use violence comes hedged about with qualifiers. Not you must kill unbelievers in Mecca, but you are allowed to, but only after a grace period is over. And only if there is no other pact in place by then. And only if they try to keep you away from the Kaaba. And only if they attack you first, and even then. God is merciful, forgiveness is supreme, and so, essentially, better if you don't. Now, I'm fascinated by this approach of better if you don't, which appears several times in the Quran. What we have here, as I understand it, is a gradualist approach to the radical social changes included in the Prophet's message. It's a recognition that if change is really to take root, it can't be dictated and imposed on people from above, but that they need to be invited into it. So basically, instead of an order, it's an invitation to a better way of doing things, an appeal to the better side of human nature. Yes, if you insist, you may continue in the old ways, but really think about it, consider carefully, and you'll see. Better if you don't. It's a recognition that it takes time for mere humans to adjust to a new way of seeing and being in the world. The same might also be said of a new way of both seeing Islam and being Muslim in America. Again, this won't happen overnight, but I think it has begun, and not only because of Egypt and Tunisia. The roots of it are already in place, with a new generation of American Muslims in their 20s and 30s. Some are religious, some are not, but still identify as Muslim in much the same way that I still identify as Jewish. Some are third, fourth, or even fifth generation Americans. Some are sons and daughters of immigrants, some are converts. But they have one major thing in common. They're beginning to make Islam cool, because they're cool. They include writers and filmmakers, IT innovators and political activists, comedians and academics. And yes, there are such things as cool academics. All of them wearing their Muslim identity, or their hyphenated one, Muslim American, Muslim Pakistani American, Lebanese American Muslim, and so on, with a kind of casual confidence. They're involved, they're activist, and they're not in the least defensive. Armed with a wry humor and a sharp sense of irony, they laugh at simplistic slogans like Islam versus the West. An absurd juxtaposition, of course, given that so many Westerners are Muslim. Or at the infamous meme of the clash of civilizations, since what they represent is the blending of civilizations. In short, they're the increasingly visible polar opposite of Islamist extremism. Without even trying, they confound the stereotypes. And the more visible they become, the less the smallest but most extreme minority can claim, as it inevitably does, to represent the whole. I know how infuriating the dominance of that loud minority can be. The loudest American Jews, for instance, are still those in knee-jerk support of every policy of the Israeli government. But younger liberal Jews are now realizing that their identity as Jews has nothing in common with that of Bible-spouting settlers who seem to think that Palestinians are disposable, or with an Israeli government that's made Gaza into a huge internment camp. Just as you are appalled by terrorists acting in the name of their distortion of Islam, so I am appalled by terrorists acting in the name of their distortion of Judaism. I see those settlers as my Al-Qaeda, and their claim to represent the Jewish people not only insults me, but insults both the spirit and the essence of Judaism as I see it, while their claim to represent God is quite simply obscene. Judgment belongs to God alone, it says in the Quran. And it's a measure of just how obscenely a holy text can be distorted that the earliest Islamist extremists, the Kharijis, the followers of Imam Ali who turned against him when he agreed to arbitration after the Battle of Siffin, adopted that as their battle cry. The assassin who slashed at Ali with his knife shouted that very line as he did so. Judgment belongs to God alone. Without realizing, it seems, that so it does, to God and not to humans. So the terrible irony is that while the Kharijis were so adamantly, quoting the Quran. They were at the same time denying it by insisting that they had the right to judge for God. They acted, that is, as though they were God, playing both judge and executioner. In religious terms, I believe this is called heresy. In non-religious terms, it's certainly the most stunning arrogance, which is exactly what the Quran repeatedly warns against. So the real co-religionists here, as I see it, are the fundamentalist extremists, the Kharijis of all faiths. Al-Qaeda suicide bombers killing pilgrims in Iraq, settlers in the West Bank shooting Palestinian farmers, American anti-abortionists killing doctors as they claim to defend life. All these are brothers in arms, quite literally blood brothers. Fundamentalist extremism, that is really a separate religion all its own, or rather an anti-religion, because it kills the essence of faith. It leaves just the shell, that shiny, glossy, impermeable shell of righteousness with nothing inside, or in fact, less than nothing, because it kills the soul. Now, as an agnostic, I'm always hesitant to say I know for sure, but this I do know for sure. Muhammad himself will be nothing but utterly repelled and dismayed, outraged by what has been and is still being said and done by terrorists and extremists in his name and in the name of God. The rigidity of mind and inhumanity of action displayed by both 7th and 21st century extremists are the exact opposite of the ethics of the Quran, which consistently returns to the admonition of forgiveness, to compassion, honor, and mercy as being the higher road. To endure with fortitude and to forgive is a duty incumbent on all, it says. Whoever bears patiently and is forgiving, surely that is constancy to God. Now, not long ago, I heard a wonderful definition of forgiveness, one that combines wisdom with humor, insight with humanity. Forgiveness, it went, is abandoning all hope of a perfect past. And it seems to me as a psychologist that a lot is contained in that word perfect. That it's this searching for perfection that's so problematic. Why is it so hard to accept that we're human and messy and imperfect? Our sages knew it, thus the Middle Eastern tradition of deliberately flawed carpets, or the Orthodox Jewish one of leaving unpainted patches of wall, remind us that only God is capable of perfection. In fact, judgment belongs to God alone could as well be rendered as perfection belongs to God alone. Perfection is transcendent, beyond the human. The Quran notes that humans are the most contentious of all beings, which is absolutely undeniable, but perhaps we could be less so if we could not only abandon all hope of a perfect past, but also let go of the idea of a perfect future. That is, if more people were to adopt what I understand as a more Sufi way of seeing things, which is to strive for perfection in the full knowledge that it is unattainable, an impossible ideal, beyond the reach of human beings. As against the black and white digital way of being in the world, a world of absolutes, of either or, inside or outside, I would pose the recognition that between pure black and pure white, there are an infinite number of shades of gray, and that this is where we live. Or to put it another way, we live between the two poles, the North Pole and the South Pole, not at them, because human life at the North Pole and the South Pole is quite simply impossible.